Hi everyone. I hope all of you are doing good. In this week's presentation, we'll talk about how to prepare and present a journal club presentation, or maybe a critical appraisal, whatever the name is. This is a brief presentation about how to prepare that presentation and share it in the academic community. So you start with the title of the paper that you are presenting. And the title will include also the authors and the DOI of the paper. And just for your information, the DOI is the Digital Objects Identifier, and it's usually a number that most of the time when you read an article, you don't bother yourself focusing on it. I just mention it here just to raise the awareness about the DOI, that each and every academic paper or even a book chapter, they have an identifier. I highlight it here in these two presentation in yellow. It's usually either under the abstract or on top of the article, but it's good to know that there is something called DOI, identifies each single academic work. It's like a thumbprint for that academic work, and it's just good to know about it. So you present the title of your paper, and you go ahead and show the table of contents, and it's the same contents of this presentation as well. So if you remember from my presentation on the content of the academic article and how to read it, usually it starts with the introduction and background, and the methods, then the results, and then the conclusion and discussion. I'll detail each part of this sections again in this presentation. And finally, you present the critique of the paper. And that's an important component of any journal club, to show your critique for what you are presenting, because it's an academic presentation. So you have to show your input and your comments about this specific research. And then you recap your presentation. So let's start with the introduction and background. In this section, you usually share the background of the paper, which most of the time is what is known in the evidence about the specific topic that you are presenting. So it gives something like a brain storm for the audience to think about what is known to this point and what is this paper should add. And usually you finish your background with the research question, and ideally it should be a specific, clear question answerable by the end of that research. The authors share what was the answer of that question, and as I said, it should add something to the body of knowledge, because otherwise, why is this research important? In the method section, you need to mention the design of the study, whether qualitative or quantitative, and the specific type of the study. If you remember from my previous presentation, I mentioned most of the types of the studies. And if you miss that presentation, you can go to my YouTube channel under evidence-based playlist and you'll find that presentation. It's worth it. And you mentioned the study sample and the data collection method. You mentioned the inclusion and exclusion criteria. And again, because this is an academic presentation, usually the journal club or the critical appraisal, usually it's expect from the presenter to have some further details about the methods, statistical information about the research rather than just the conclusions and the results. I remember when I talked in my previous presentation about how to read an academic article, I mentioned that it's not necessary to go in depth for the methods. And that's when you are reading for the sake of the knowledge gained from that article. But when you are presenting to a journal club or a conference or a meeting in your unit or whatever, you need to show some understanding. And that's when you need to have some details about the methods of that study. You also mentioned the intervention done in that study, if it's interventional, and the outcomes as well. For the outcomes, we have primary outcomes, and it's usually the direct answer for the research question. That's the main reason why researchers conducted that research, to find the main outcome of that intervention. But on the other hand, there are some secondary outcomes. They are not the intended outcomes, but by the by, researchers found that some other outcomes worth reporting, and they mention it. Let's give an example. For example, if they were testing a new medication for hypertension and they found that the drug, which was expected to affect only the systolic blood pressure, affect also the diastolic blood pressure, this is the secondary outcome. So the primary outcome, the impact of the intervention on the systolic blood pressure, and the secondary outcome, the impact on the diastolic blood pressure. So we need to mention both primary and secondary outcomes. If it's not an interventional study, it's just observational study, or it's a systematic review, you don't need to go in depth about those details unless they were included in some of the studies that were part of your systematic review. I mean, you have to tailor your presentation, of course, according to the type of the study that you are presenting. And that's the point. We go to the results section. And in the results section, we better to share some visual aids like graphs, tables, whatever is used in that paper we are presenting, because it makes the presentation lighter and it helps the audience to understand easier than just talking in numbers, because the results usually contain numbers. So the two statistical measures that we at least need to share and explain are the p-value and confidence interval. Let's start with the p-value. The p-value, and it's usually in every paper, you will see the p-value. It's the measurements that give us a clue about whether the results are significant or no. And the cutoff point to determine the significance of the result is 0.05. Any value equals or less than 0.05, I repeat that again, equals or less than 0.05 is significant. So the smaller the p-value, the more significant the results. And it means the results that we get is most probably is not due to chance. It's due to the intervention leading to that outcome. And it also means we can reject the null hypothesis. And if you forgot the null hypothesis, I would say it's the hypothesis that assumes that there is no relation between the intervention and the outcome. And usually any research aims to reject the null hypothesis to prove the alternative hypothesis, which say there is a relation between the intervention and the outcome. So if it happened, we got positive results and the p-value of those results is less or equal to 0.5, so we can confidently say the intervention affects the outcome and it's not due to chance that we got this result. So I hope this is clear enough. The statistical measure is a confidence interval, and it's usually 95% confidence interval. Here it's a range. It's not a value, a single value. It's a range which has a minimum and a maximum value. And to be significant, it shouldn't cross the one value. Let's give an example. The value in green highlight here is significant. Why? Because it's 0.25 to 0.98. These two values are below the 1. If you remember the number line from the basic mathematics, we have something called the number line, which has a 1 in the middle. You have some numbers before or smaller than the 1. You have number more than 1. So the numbers below the 1 means they don't cross the 1. And the numbers more than 1 are to the right in the number line. So if the values of the two numbers in the confidence interval range are less than 1, that means they don't cross the 1 value. That means the confidence interval is significant, or the measurements that we used and we found it has a confidence interval of this range is significant. On the other hand, insignificant 95 confidence interval is when it has the 1 value in between the minimum and maximum values that we have in that range. Example of that is the two numbers highlighted in red. If the paper says the confidence interval is between 0.25 to 1.2, this is an insignificant 95 confidence interval. Why? Because the 1 falls in between the 0.25 and the 1.2. And the smaller the range, the better the confidence interval. It means what? It means if we repeat this research in different study sample, we most probably to got result that fall in that range. That means this is significant research because it gives us the range that even if we repeat this research in different population, the range will be exactly in the middle between these two numbers. It need not to be the same exact number, but the number of the measurement that we are using will fall in between these two numbers. I hope this explanation was clear enough to understand the confidence interval. After you share the results, you mention the conclusion of that research. So it should be a short summary, 2 or 3 sentences concluding that research paper. And your part of the presentation will start because in the previous slides, you were just sharing the information about the paper that you are presenting. The following part is the paper critique, which is the presenter input and insight about this research. So in this section, you need to discuss the implications of that research, the strengths, the weaknesses, the limitations, and the biases. Let's talk about each of these separately. The implications of the research are the potential consequences of the finding of that research. Would this change the current practice in a way? Maybe it opens doors for future research. Maybe it might lead to policy change. Whatever the implications, we need to mention that. Sometimes the author themselves will mention the implications of their research, and you will find it around the end of the article. The strengths also sometimes are mentioned on the paper, sometimes are not. So Just to give you hints about what to mention in the strengths, you look into the methodology, the sample size, how the data collection was run, and what quality check the researchers use to make sure their data is clean, and so on. You also hit on the applicability of the research, the possibility that research might be generalized for other populations, whether it will lead to any process improvement, and so on. The weaknesses, the exact same items, but in a different way. Like in the methodology, if the study sample is small, that is a weakness. If it's not representative, that's also another weakness. If that research doesn't add to the body of the knowledge, it's a weakness as well. Limitations, same in a way to the weaknesses, but you might speak about the time of the study. If it's an interventional study and it was done for a short period, you cannot make strong conclusions from that short period. The resources used in the study and the focus of the study, whether was it narrow, broad, and so on. You also talk about the confounding factors, and that leads us to the biases, because there are so many biases. A lot of the time, researchers fall in one or more of the biases. For example, we have the selection bias, how representative the sample was, whether there is healthy user bias, because when you collect your sample, there is tendency for healthy individual to participate in research. If you it depends on the way that you select your study sample. um, the information bias, like recall bias, also need to be considered. There is something called observer bias, like the researcher usually have expectation about what the results might be. That's also a bias. There are a lot of biases. I'm just here giving samples. There is publication bias, like usually journals accept researches with positive findings more than studies that had negative findings. That's also a bias, because in research, whether the results are negative or positive, it's worth sharing with others to learn from that study. And then you end your presentation with a recap, giving summary about what you presented, and open the questions and be ready to answer the floor questions about what you have presented. I hope this presentation just highlighted some important points everyone need to consider when they are presenting a journal club or a critical appraisal. And with that, I conclude my presentation for this week, and I hope you'll like it. Thank you and goodbye.